Indeed, it is as special can be, because we're with my absolute favorite animal, the leopard. And this is the biggest of the big males that we get here in Djuma. He is the dominant male leopard, and he has been with us for the last 2 days. He's been hanging around in the area, and it's because he's got a bit of a sore paw at the moment, so he's feeling a bit sorry for himself. But look how beautiful he is. You can see he's now just found himself a little bit of shade. And earlier we were talking about how animals stay cool, and I was telling you that cats like to pant a little bit. So you can see that's exactly what he's doing. His mouth is open and his tongue is going back and forth, and he's breathing quite fast, and that's because he's trying to cool his body down as much as possible. So he's using that water vapor going off his tongue to cool the blood in his tongue and send the cooler blood back into the body. The other thing that he's doing is, you see how he's pushing himself right into the shade so that he can get as much shade on his body as possible. He's also lying in a spot where there's a bit of wind that's blowing. You can see the grass is moving a little bit there, and so that's all helping to cool him down. But oh, there we go, it's time for a nap. At the end of the day, it's still a little hot for these leopards. They like to only move around in the crepuscular hours. Now, when I say crepuscular, what I'm talking about is the hours around dawn and dusk. So that's the name for it. Most people will tell you that leopards are nocturnal animals, but actually they spend most of their time moving around just before sunrise and just before after sunset. So those are the kind of active periods that they like to move around, when there's just a little bit of light in the sky, but it's a bit gloomy. So you know when you go home at night and it's just as the sun is set and it's just before it gets dark, that's the time that leopards like to move around. They know that that's the best time, because the animals are starting to come out of the shady areas from the day, and they're starting to go to open sections, and the leopards can then use the fringes of those open sections to hunt, and they can try and then catch some of the herbivores like the kudu that Noel saw earlier. Tianan, you're wondering how fast a leopard can run. Well, leopards are fairly slow in comparison to something like a cheetah or even the lions. Leopards will do about 65 kilometers an hour, so in miles, that will be about... I think it's close to about 35 miles an hour, somewhere around there, that they'll run at. So they are not as fast as a cheetah that will do close to 60-70 miles an hour. So this cheetah is a much faster animal, and that's because it's built for speed, whereas our leopard is built for power. And the reason why a leopard is built for power is because leopards, when they kill the animal, they like to take their food up into a tree. And so that means that they can get it away from lions and hyenas and all of these other animals. And so they have to have very powerful, strong legs and muscles on the chest, and that means that slows them down. The heavier they are and the more muscular they are, the slower that they run. So cheetahs are sprinters and leopards are more powerful wrestlers, if you wanted to compare it to us as people in sport. Horton, you're wondering why the leopard has spots. Well, I believe some of you are studying adaptations and those kind of things. Well, a leopard's spots are all there to help him camouflage. When he's in areas like this, if you look in that shady section, you see there's a bit of shade on his coat as well as a bit of sun. So when they're in thick areas with lots of leaves and trees, the sun going through those leaves causes dappled light. Now, dappled light is patches of light and dark, and so his spots on his coat help him to camouflage and to blend in with his environment and make him invisible to prey animals. And it's why leopards are really hard to spot. We're very lucky here in this reserve that we're able to see leopards regularly because they're quite relaxed, but normally they're very shy and they get into a thicket, and it is absolutely incredible how easily a leopard can disappear in a thicket when it goes into it. So the spots are very, very useful. Now, Amber, you're wondering if they're born with spots. So Amber, yes, they are born with spots. They just are very, very close together. So when they're first born, they almost look like a black ball, because the spots haven't extended out just yet. So you see on him, it looks like his spots have exploded, and there's in the middle. When they're still little babies, those spots are all quite close together, so they're quite dark in color. But as they get older, so the spots go out a little bit, and then you get what we call these rosettes. So they do have spots as babies, and in fact, even their skin is spotted underneath the fur because of the dark hair follicles and then the light hair follicles. So they do have a spotted coat. Even if you were to shave their fur off, there is still spots underneath there, which is very, very cool. So Fiona, you're wondering about the whiskers. Well, whiskers are also a very important part of a leopard's or any cat's life. Those are there to be able to help sense things. So when I say sense things, it's like their eyes and their ears and their noses. The whiskers have little cells in them that help them pick up vibrations. And so when they're walking through these thickets and it's dark and it's dingy and they can't quite see the antelopes that are moving around, these little whiskers pick up the movement in the grass and they're able to tell the leopard what's going on in front of them. Also, it tells them what's coming towards their face. So if the whiskers pick up a branch or something like that, they know to close their eyes so that they don't hurt their eyes in any way whatsoever. So very important for a leopard to have. Right, well, our leopard is going to be very sleepy. He's probably going to spend most of the afternoon here, and so are we, because I absolutely love leopards. One person who also loves leopards is my friend Scott, and I hope that he's going to find one as well this afternoon. Indeed, he's not little at all. He's a very large kitty, and I think he'll be quite offended if we had to call him little, because he is the big boss of the leopard world in this area. At the moment, though, he's not too interested in anything we've got to say. He's really having a nice long nap, and it's because it's still too hot for him. You can imagine if it's a very warm day outside and you have a big jersey on, how uncomfortable it is. I know, because I had a jersey on just now and I took it off very quickly because the sun is really quite warm. So I think he's going to rest for quite some time still. Now, Chloe, you're wondering how much they sleep. Well, leopards are not quite the same as some of the other big cats in that things like lions will sleep for almost 20 hours a day. Leopards are a little bit more active than that, but on general, they'll kind of sleep anywhere between sort of 12 and 15 hours in a 24-hour period. So they do sleep a lot, and the reason why they sleep a lot is because when they are active, they use a lot of energy very quickly. When a leopard chases prey animals and has to run at high speed and wrestle with these prey species, it's utilizing a lot of its energy, and so unfortunately it then has to sleep a lot to store that energy. Right, now one of my colleagues has got a bird, I'm not sure which one, but before it flies away, let's head across to them. Well, Noel, I hope your elephants do come down shortly, and how beautiful is that bird? It's one of my favorite birds that we get out here, those iridescent blue wings and white chest. It is just one of the most phenomenal species, and I am quite jealous of that woodland kingfisher because it's having a good bath and enjoying some cool, refreshing water, which I think would be quite nice. I wouldn't mind jumping into a dam or a swimming pool myself, because it is quite warm out here, and it seems like a good idea to go swimming. Our friend Tingana, though, I don't think would like to swim at all. Cats are not the most sort of happy about being in water. You'll find that they often try and avoid it as much as possible. Although I have seen leopards crossing rivers and various other places before, but they'll try and keep out of the water as much as possible. Now, I was saying earlier that our male has got a bit of an injury, and his left leg is the one that is sore at the moment, but that doesn't seem to have stopped him from finding food, because if you look at his tummy is a little bit round. You see that? So he has at least been finding food somewhere. I'm not sure what he's eating, but he has been finding food. I think what he's doing at the moment is taking advantage of the fact that we're in the beginning of summer, and so that means lots and lots of antelope. So things like impalas and kudu that Noel showed you, they're having all their babies at the moment, and their babies, when they're born, are still a little bit wobbly on the feet and a little bit kind of nervous, and they don't really have experience and know how to evade predators. So if he finds tiny newborn babies, he can often grab them before they're even able to run, and so I think that's what he's being able to try and hunt and look after. Now, there's another animal that leopards sometimes hunt. I don't think this male would be doing it because it's a little bit too fleet-footed for him, but let's go across to Scotty because he's got one of those prey species. There is a little tail that is sticking out of the bush, and that's because he's decided that he's going to go and park himself a little bit more hidden than where he was originally. So he's, I think, maybe finding a little bit more shade to try and stay cool. But I was talking earlier about his camouflage, and you can see now exactly how camouflaged a leopard can be. When they go and lie in dappled light and thick grass, it almost becomes impossible to spot him. You can imagine if you were driving past and that tail just drops down, you really wouldn't be able to see him at all. So it's an incredible amount of camouflage that he's got, and you'll find eventually he'll settle down again and the tail will drop down. Now, unfortunately, that is all we've got time for with all of you today. I hope that you've had a wonderful time with us and that you've enjoyed the day and the little safari through Africa, and that you have a wonderful day at school the rest of your day, and that you don't get too much homework, and hopefully we'll see you on a safari sometime in the future. Right, there we go. So that's the schools. They've gone off and are going back to go and do some work, as good school kids should be doing, and now we can carry on with our afternoon. So it's a reminder to all of you that have just tuned in, or the regular viewers that are watching, hashtag Safari Live on Twitter if you want to get hold of us and ask us any questions. I think what we're going to do is reposition ourselves, because at the moment we can't really see too much of Tingana. I'm sure if we just go around the bush we should be able to see him just fine, and actually might help a little bit, because at the moment we're staring directly into the sun. So we'll try and just get a little bit of a better view on our big male leopard. He's still very sleepy at this stage. I don't think he's going to move too much. I think we're going to have a situation where he's probably going to spend most of the afternoon here and try and kind of rest it out. Let's see if we just move a little bit. So you can see there's some guests there on the vehicle, so they've come out to see what's going on, and very lucky that they get to spend it with our big male leopard. Now, while we reposition, I believe Scott has found one of the kings of the predatory bird world. Now, it is me, not Scott Dyson, it is the other bearded fella, and unfortunately it's a very sad story, that wild dog, but it is nature, it is the way things do go, and unfortunately, you know, the injuries sustained must have been far worse internally than they were externally, and it's always a sad thing when you see that. You can see we've managed to get some view of Tingana at the moment. He's sitting in the thickest bush possible. If you drove past here now, there is no ways you would spot this leopard if he lay down flat. I promise you, you cannot see anything from any other angle than what we're at right now. And so we're kind of just watching him, and he's still panting away and sleeping. And I have a funny feeling that he's going to get hot where he is. The sun is going to hit him quite quickly. There's not much shade where he's lying, and I think he might go back towards the road, which would actually be much more pleasant for everybody involved. It would allow us all to be able to see him a lot better. And I've really enjoyed, I know he's injured and I know that he's not, you know, in his healthy, fit self, but I've enjoyed spending quite a lot of quality time with Tingana. I got to spend the whole morning with him this morning as he moved around on quarantine. He was lying beautifully out in the open with this big thunderstorm behind him and lightning, and it was really quite something to see. And then he kind of meandered his way around quarantine, and then eventually ended up right close to where we are now, and then fell asleep. But it was yesterday afternoon we also spent some time with him, and so it's been really nice just to spend some really good quality time again, and just really sort of hang out with him and see how he goes about his afternoons. I was saying to Wiem though that he must be feeling a little under the weather, because Tingana is not a leopard, in my experience and in the period of time that I've followed him, that really likes to lie on and next to roads. Normally he does a lot of patrolling and you find him on roads, but once he decides it's time for a rest, he tends to cut off into the bush, and he tends to go into an area where you can try and find a nice thicket to lie down, much like what you see now, and where you can then have a little bit of a nap. Oh boy, is your paw sore? So there we go. You see what I was saying? I think he's going to come out onto the road. So I think he's going to lie down on the road itself. I think he's not comfortable there. He's in the sun. So what I'm going to do is just go forward a little bit. I think he's just sitting now with his face tucked out. But before I go forward, I've got to try and not slap myself with a bush, as you can see here. So while we do this, let's go across to our other bearded ranger for the afternoon and see what bird he's got this time. Indeed, and you can see the beautiful velvety coat of our dominant male leopard just slowly beating to his breath as he takes a nice rest in the shade. He's slowly come out now. He's actually right out in the open, thank goodness, and he's far more visible than he was earlier in the day. It's quite an interesting thing, because I thought he was going to stay in that thicket and try and kind of spend most of his afternoon there, because it seemed as though he had a nice little place to hide and he kind of could spend the day in the shade, but I think the sun got to him a little bit and he far prefers being right out in the open. You also probably find far less parasites in the shorter grass than in that longer grass. Scarlett, you're wondering if leopards recognize human voices? Scarlett, I don't know. they're intelligent animals, and no doubt their sense of hearing is far more superior than what ours is. So I would imagine, yes, that is the case. I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that these animals are not able to determine different sounds. I'm pretty sure they can even determine the different pitches of the engines of the vehicles that drive around here. But whether or not they recognize our exact voices or associate anything to the different voices, I'm not quite sure. There's his beautiful smiley face that's nice up and close. So any of you that want to know how to ID Tingana, there's a nice big smiley face on his shoulder that we often use. So you can see it right in the middle of the frame. It's kind of side on. So there's the two eyes and the little sort of half circle that is there that sometimes you can use. When he stands up, it's a little bit more straight, sort of turned up, and you can actually see it a lot easier. But, you know, at the end of the day, like I say, I think these animals are far more intelligent than we give them credit for. So I suspect that they do can hear different tones and different pitches. Whether that influences their behavior, I'm not quite sure. Like I say, I think that remains to be seen and remains to be studied. At the end of the day, you find that Tingana's behavior with myself or Noel or Scott or James is pretty similar. He's never really any different. He's fairly the same with most of the guides, and so it seems as though even though he might be able to recognize my voice or recognize the tone of the car, it doesn't really seem to affect his behavior in any way. And so it's a difficult thing then to measure, because at the end of the day, how would you know that he is associating a certain thing with our voices? What would be interesting is if a negative experience had to happen to him, or a positive, so maybe, you know, if we had to keep feeding him or we had to keep chasing him, would he then respond to my voice every time if I was in different cars? That would be an interesting thing, but obviously we're never going to do any of that, because at the end of the day, we don't, one, want to feed him, and two, we don't want to chase him, because at the end of the day, we like viewing Tingana and love watching him walk around and do his natural thing, and so we won't be doing any of those things. What's wrong, boy? Your paw is still sore, isn't it? You can see the way that he gets up at the moment. He kind of lifts the paw up. He doesn't really want to put too much pressure on it, so still not very comfortable at this stage. Safari Wildman, you're asking if I know exactly what is wrong with his foot. I don't. I really don't know what's wrong with him at all. I mean, I've tried to look. I know somebody sent me a screenshot, and I can't remember who. I do apologize. My brain is a bit mushy in this heat, but somebody sent me a screenshot, and it looked like there's a small hole on the sort of outer side of that wrist area, or just above the toes, that might be causing an issue. But for me, it looks more like it's an internal thing, so maybe a little ligament or a muscular strain or something like that. It reminds me a lot of Shadow's injury. The way that Shadow walked is very similar to the way that Tingana is walking, and I would imagine that he will be okay. I mean, we've seen Shadow, she still limps a little bit and is a little bit kind of ginger on that front leg, and it's taken some time, so it might be that. You never know, maybe he's even broken one of his small feet, the small bones in his foot. It's difficult to say. There doesn't seem to be any visible swelling either, although he hasn't walked enough and stood close enough to me that I can actually really analyze it. So hopefully this afternoon he will get up and stand on the road, and then maybe we can get a really nice look at that paw and see what's going on. But there's definitely discomfort there. The amazing thing, though, is that it seems as though there must be a lot of swelling and lactic acid buildup in it, because he walks, and this morning we had him walking, and he walked very badly in the beginning, and as he walked more and more slow, it started to ease up. He was still limping, but he got a lot more of his normal gait back, and he was kind of quite steady on his feet, and he was even jumping up and scent marking and rubbing his face and landing on that foot without kind of toppling over or anything like that. So while I think it is sore, I think the more he walks on it, the actually better it feels to him at the time, except then obviously it gets stiff and sore when he starts to rest again like this. So when he stands up this afternoon, it's probably going to look really bad, because he's been sleeping in this area most of the day. Saber, you're wondering if I ever figured out if we can see his protruding claw in his tracks. Well, Saber, I actually haven't looked at Tingana tracks in quite some time, because the last couple of days that we found Tingana, we've literally just bumped into him. I haven't even had to look for a footprint. The first day he crossed over from Little Gari directly in front of us, and this morning we drove out of camp, and there he was sitting in the middle of quarantine, so we didn't even really have to track. And this afternoon, you know, we've kind of stumbled upon him on the road as well. So what I'll do is I hope that he'll walk at some point today, and maybe then we'll be able to see, and I'll have a really good look and try and pick up if that claw does show in the track. I would imagine on a surface like this road surface, you can see is quite a hard surface with a thin layer of sand on top of it. It's not a very thick layer there, and so I would think that on this surface it would be very difficult to actually pick up that claw mark. But in soft sand like the Mulawati or one of the drainage lines, definitely I would imagine that that claw will be visible and we'll be able to see it. And especially now, because it's on his right foot, and so he's favoring his right foot heavily, and so a lot more weight on that right foot is really going to dig that paw down, and that claw mark should show then in his track over the next little bit. So we'll definitely keep an eye out, and I hopefully will be able to show all of you when we do find it. And while I kind of sit here and watch Tingana daydream and hope that he'll get up at some point during the afternoon, let's go back across to Noel and see where the road has taken her from the wild dog. Well, he may look better than you, Scott, but he was walking very similar to how you were walking a few days ago. For those of you that don't know, Scott impaled his foot on a thorn and was limpy-loo for a few days and was walking around with a little bit of a kind of hobbled manner, just like Tingana was. So nice to see Scott has bounced back. Hopefully Tingana will be the same. You can see he's now on his back, typical hot cat style, where he just kind of relaxes there, opens up that stomach and allows a bit of a breeze to kind of blow over. While he was lying the other way just now, we were able to get a really nice view of his left side, and BM and I got out our binoculars and we had a really good look at that left paw and left shoulder area, and he's got a couple little scrapes and cuts on the shoulder. They're not easy to see, but there are a few there, and then he's got a little wound right on the top left side of his paw, and it looks as though that's what's causing the issue. I don't know what's caused it, whether it's a bite from something like a hyena or another leopard or something like that, but there's definitely some sort of puncture wound that's gone in there. It also could, of course, be when he wrestled some sort of animal. I know he tackled a waterbuck recently on Cheetah Plains just after we last saw him with that impala kill, and maybe that's what's happened, is as that waterbuck has fallen, so his wrist has been caught underneath it, and maybe a little stump has gone in there, or some sort of a thorn or a branch. You never know. It's really difficult to say without actually seen the injury take place. Also, if it had been a cat, I feel like he would have a lot more scratches and scrapes and scars on his face and around his neck areas, which he doesn't seem to have. So difficult to say what's happened to him, but there definitely is a little wound on that left paw, but I think he'll be okay. I think he'll be just fine, but it's going to require a lot of rest and a lot of relaxation to get right from it. The good news is that it's definitely, that it seems like he's found food since yesterday. So yesterday we spent the whole afternoon with him, and his belly does have a little bit of a round look to it today compared to yesterday. So I think maybe he's managed to find himself maybe a little baby impala or something on quarantine last night. I believe there's a whole bunch of vultures on quarantine at the moment, and so I wonder if maybe he didn't capture something small that was born last night. There's also, as we know, a couple of wildebeest that have been born, and I believe Scott did see our little footloose this morning and was running around apparently, and all well and fine. And for those of you that don't know, and I don't know if Scott's mentioned it, he had an absolutely insane morning where he saw a wildebeest give birth on foot, which is absolutely insane, and he managed to see the whole process. Apparently it was a much quicker process than what we saw from our lady friend yesterday, which begs the question as to why, and we were discussing it must mean that this must have been her first one that we saw, because it took so much longer than the one that Scott had on foot this morning. The one that Scott had on foot was about 10 minutes and it was out, as opposed to the almost 3-hour marathon of that poor female yesterday morning. But Tingana will most certainly go after a baby wildebeest. That would be a prime snack for him, even though I would imagine the herd would try and band together and chase him. If he can get that baby wildebeest on its own, I wouldn't be surprised he goes and grabs it and runs off with it. So you never know what he's gotten, but he's definitely found himself something in the last 24 hours, and that's great news, because when he's injured like this, as long as he can keep sustaining himself with nutrients and try and rest as much as possible, that paw will eventually heal and he will be okay. Now, I was talking about the baby wildebeest, and it sounds like the man himself who had his midwife gloves on this morning is now looking after a couple of other little ones from a different species. Well, he did lift his head and he got up and turned around and has promptly plonked himself back down again in the shade. So no movement too far just yet. Still a sleepy cat at this stage and still taking it very easy. It was amazing though. He kind of just popped his head up, looked all very alert, stood up, turned around and then plonked straight back down again without so much as a second thought about flopping down. So think he's not quite ready. Maybe he stood up and felt the sun still quite harsh and decided, I'm going to leave it at that and rather not go walking around just yet. But it's interesting because I was just saying to VM now, yesterday we sat with him until around 6ish, where he started to stir at that sort of period of the day, and it seems as though it's starting to happen again. He kind of is at least a lot more awake now and is a lot more kind of alert as to what's going on, even though it doesn't look like it that right now. So, James Richard, you wondering if we ever relocated on that unknown mating pair? Well, yes, they were relocated not the next day. So they were seen at Djuma. The next day they weren't found, and the day after they were found on Arathusa going westwards. And I believe they then broke apart that night. So since then, that male has not been seen as far as I know. So, but the female has been, the Ingrid Dam young female, she has been seen, but the male, I have no reports on him, so maybe he's around as well. I'm not sure. Tingana was down in Little Gowrie, so I'm not 100% sure he kind of met up with Tingana and that there was any sort of dispute between those two males. I feel like they were too far apart. Maybe it was, you know, like I say, more in that waterbuck kill that he made on Cheetah Plains. That was just after he had the impala here at Djuma. The last time we saw him before this little period, and that waterbuck is a heavy, big set animal, and pulling that down is no easy feat, and you never know. Like I say, maybe as he pulled it down, it just pinned him on a branch, and that's what caused a little kind of branch to go into his paw and actually cause a bit of damage to one of the bones in his foot. You never know, but I don't think he's had any altercation. But it would be nice to know where that male's gone, that unknown male, and what he's up to. I feel like he was seen a lot during that mating period because of the female being so relaxed, and he was so interested in her that allowed sort of visuals of him and people to actually see him. In fact, I even recorded a little bit of a video of him so that we could show all of you guys, and I completely forgot about it. So for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, we had James actually was the one who found it. We had a male leopard that was in our area how many days ago? It was about 4 or 5 days ago, and he was with an unknown female at the time, which we identified as Ingrid Dam young female. And so this is a little kind of thing that Ferg and James managed to get, and that's the male there. You can see he's got quite light colored eyes, quite boxy face. Then the female, so that's the female over there, and both of them were near Philemon's dip. Now, unfortunately, I think this is the one that's more of the female than the male, so I'll go back to one of the male, but that's them kind of just looking around and just having a little bit of a look. So it's just to get a sort of spot pattern there for the female. You know, I'm pretty sure it's Ingrid Dam young female, and from the way that she looks and when she turns her face, she's got the 5 spots on the right side. So there we go. As she turns, it's pretty much, I'm sure that it is her. I have seen her a few times in my time. Now the male that's him over there, so we'll get a better view of him. You can see quite a bulky leopard around the shoulder areas, so hopefully we will get to see him at some point, although I'm not that unhappy that we're not seeing him at this stage, because ultimately if he moves in here, then it's going to be very dangerous for Tundi's little one, and that little ball of cuteness we want to stick around and to be able to survive. So hopefully that's going to be the case. Hopefully we're going to get a situation where, you know, Tundi's cub will be alive for quite some time, and Tingana will hold on for now, and then this boy can start pushing in the west at some point, and maybe we'll get some fleeting glimpses of him. But there we go. So for all of you that didn't know about it, that's who we were talking about. He seems to be a beautiful individual, doesn't he? I know a lot of you have said, isn't it Anderson? It's most definitely not Anderson. Anderson does not look like that. He's got a different eye color, and he's got a different nose structure too, as well as his nose being quite a dark black, whereas this male has got still quite a pink nose. Now, a number of you have also asked me how old I think that male is. That male, I would recommend, I haven't personally seen him in real life. It's only the footage that James had of him and photographs and other things, but because his nose is quite pink and his bulk and his ears are very, very clean, there's no tattiness in those ears, I would say that this male is probably around sort of 5 or 6 years old, maybe a little bit younger even, so somewhere in that area. It would be interesting to know where he came from. We don't know at all where he's from. We don't know where he's come from. Nobody knows who he is, but interesting that he's arrived here, and he seems to be very relaxed with one vehicle. James said to me that he was really very relaxed in his movement, and that there was 2 vehicles there and he didn't run or anything like that, and so maybe he's getting a little bit more comfortable, which is at least good news if he is going to stick around. But it is definitely a concern from a point of view of all of our young boys, Tamba, Hosana and Tingana. They all are going to have a tough time if a new male comes in here, because he's not going to allow any of those boys to settle down or to stay in this particular section. So he can stay in the west for now. He's happily can fit in and slot in there for the meantime, and maybe in a year or two's time, once the others are all kind of established, then he can start pushing back this way. It means that Tingana's got his work cut out for him, and an injury like this is going to make that a lot harder to be able to keep his area safe. So this is very cool. Sebastian, who I'm sure everybody knows, one of our cameramen, his mom is actually watching, and she's asking, how long do leopards sleep for in a day? Well, they sleep for roughly, it will be about 13 to 15 hours, somewhere around there. It depends. This male is sleeping a lot more because of his injury at the moment, so he's in a situation where he's kind of having to rest because of this sore paw of his, but sometimes, you know, that will mean that he'll kind of go over maybe 15 hours, but for the most part they kind of spend between sort of 12 and 15 hours sleeping in a day's period. A lot of people believe that leopards are very mobile at night and that they move a lot at night, and actually it's not really the case. They spend a lot of time moving the sort of hour before sunset and time after sunset for 2-3 hours, and then they actually spend a lot of time during the middle part of the night spending a bit of time resting, and they'll go towards water and they'll sit around water holes for a bit, and then they'll carry on again. So they're not as mobile, and it obviously is dependent on the individual, because we know Tingana, when he's fit and healthy, can walk all over the place all of the time, and Anderson is the same. But you find somebody like Hosana, he doesn't seem to move as much, so he'll rest a lot more in between his moving periods. But really nice to hear from you, and I hope that you're having a wonderful day. And just to let you know that Sebastian is well, and that he is doing very well on his new things that he's up to in terms of the drone. And Sebastian also says hello, and he sends all of his love. So there we go. Always nice when some of our family members are watching. It's always good for the team morale. Sheila, you're wondering, you say odd thought, and this is a rather strange thought, and one that I honestly have never thought of. But you're wondering, do any of the cats ever get insomnia? Well, I suppose not really, and the reason why I say this is because they're always alert. So, or maybe yes is actually the answer, is that they're always alert. And so even though he seems sleeping like this, if I start this car or I had to rustle a leaf on a tree here, he will instinctively pop his head up straight away, ears will focus, eyes will be up. So even though they're sleeping, it's not like our sleep where we kind of go to sleep and we're in this deep sleep and we really do rest. These guys have a very light sleep, and they have to be like that. Oh, bless you, Tingana. That was a big sneeze. Obviously got a fly up the nose, not very pleasant. But at the end of the day, they have things like hyenas and lions and, other leopards that they have to worry about, and so they can't afford to be in a deep sleep. So maybe that counts as some sort of insomnia, because they never really get a true proper rest. But for the most part, no, I don't think that they're still resting at the end of the day, and their eyes are closed for a lot of the sort of hot part of the day. So interesting question. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe somebody out there does know whether or not cats suffer from insomnia, but I've certainly never seen any of our wild cats suffer from having a good nap during the hot part of the day. Now, Noel is with the Birmingham males, and I'm sure if they are not feeding, they will be in a very similar pose, except I think their bellies will be a lot larger than Tingana's. I am busy with him, but he is still sleepy, and there's a really nice sort of shot of that injured paw. Hopefully he's not going to ruin it with the other foot now, but you can see there's one or two little marks in between the pads there. Almost looks like a few bite marks in there. They're not big, but there's a little red spot between the dew claw and the rest of the pad, if you can see it. And then on the other side of the foot, directly on the other side, there's a little bit of a larger hole. So hopefully he'll turn his foot a little bit and we'll be able to show you that. But you can imagine how many miles and kilometers those feet have traveled and walked and been through. It is an incredible amount of work that they've gone through, particularly with Tingana, because Tingana is not shy of a long stroll through the African bush. He always seems to be moving all over the show. That's why it's been quite nice to actually have him for a few days just sort of stationary in our area. I remember the one time we had Tingana around the EP Arethusa Simambili cut line. There's a little triangle there and a little water hole, and he was in that area, and the next morning they followed the tracks all the way and they crossed into Djuma. From Djuma they came out into Little Gari, they went to Chitwa into Nkoro all the way to their lodge where he was seen during the night. Then from there he went into Cheetah Plains, through back past Chitwa, into Annette, into Vessels, Hoffman's, Arethusa, and was found once again in the exact same place, but somebody had to follow his tracks all the way around for us to know that that was what has happened. And that walk is massive. That is a huge walk to go and to undertake, and even for a vehicle that would take you all of, I would say, probably on a game drive situation, 4 or 5 hours to cover that ground. So for a leopard to walk that in the space of 2 game drivers, and was in the summer months, so the nighttime in the summer months is a lot shorter, and it was amazing that he managed to cover all of that distance. So he does like a long walk, and maybe that's just the way he is. He prefers that. So at the moment, though, that's not happening. He's keeping it quite local, and I'm glad that he's decided local is Djuma, that's for sure, because it really is good to have him around, and I hope that he'll be okay. Yeah, at the end of the day, it is right in the heart of his territory where we are now, so he shouldn't have too many issues here over the next few days. Popo Kitty, I don't think there's any point that Tingana would really want to give up his territory, but if a younger, fitter, healthier male like the one that we were looking at just now decides to come in here and is really aggressive and is far more physical with Tingana than Tingana is able to match, then you'll find that he's reluctantly going to start moving out of the area and become a lot like Mvula in a way, and become a lot more nomadic. So he doesn't really want to give up territory. He's not going to go down without some sort of fight and some sort of resilience, and he's going to stand up to whatever threat comes his way. But ultimately he is aging, and time is not on the side of any animal really, and as time marches on, so these younger upstarts come through, and unfortunately for him, he'll have to eventually move out. The thing is, though, is he's still in great condition, besides this paw that's a little bit sore, and that's just an injury that's come about in the last little bit. Tingana is in fantastic condition. He is big, he is healthy, he's got no muscle atrophy on him whatsoever. You can see those shoulders are still full of muscle and power. His belly's got food in it, his back legs are still looking good, so he's in no way in any bad shape. You can see there's not a single tick on him, and it's surprising because in summer months we start to see these animals really collect high tick loads, but he doesn't have a single one on him, which means that he's in great condition. And so it's just this paw that is giving him a little bit of trouble, but he's still got a number of months and years left in him. That's as far as I can see. Obviously you never know out here, and you never know what can happen. Wild Dog is a perfect example of this, but for now he still looks fit and healthy and ready to carry on his reign over Djuma. Christina, no, I don't think it's a snake bite. Given that there's a wound under the paw and on top of the paw, I don't think that there is a snake bite. The one under the paw is very small. It's not easy to see. You can just see a little bit of pinkish flesh that is there and between all of the fur. And so it's not a massive gaping wound that side. The top side is the one that is a little bit more sort of open and kind of a bit more red and pussy. But his snake bite, you would have seen a situation where he would have swelled. You wouldn't have noticed any pink flesh. Generally, when snake bites happen on leopards, in my experience, is not always the case, that there gets a big swelling and it goes almost black where that swelling takes place, and you can really see that there's a lot more damage to that area. This looks a lot more like he fought with somebody, maybe even a hyena. He swatted at a hyena and a hyena bit him on the paw or something like that. Right. Now, while Tingana rests, and it's now almost the time for Tingana to start maybe going on an afternoon little walkabout. I'm sure he's a thirsty boy. Let's go back across to Scott, who's having a wonderful afternoon with his feathered friends. I am indeed, and what we've found is the lacerations that are all over the side of him. So he must have had a fight with someone. You can see there's a tick in there. There's also a few cuts and scrapes. There's another cut there. So there's a lot of little superficial wounds. So maybe he had a little altercation with another leopard somewhere along the line. But there's definitely some little claw marks and cuts and scrapes on his body. And those are signs of a male leopard who's had a hard life. And not surprising given the fact that he is approaching what we think around 11, 12 years old, and at the end of the day that's a long time for a male leopard to be out here, and he really has gone through the mill and has had to fight a lot of big males to be in the area that he's in. So it has been really interesting just to have a good look at him. We've had a great sort of sense of his size from being as close as we have been this afternoon. We've even watched his spots moving around. It seems as though the sun is starting to go down. It's starting to get to that time where I thought he might move, but unfortunately it's still time for a nap in the world of Tingana. Now, of course, it is that time of the day, unfortunately, where we start to head back home. It's been an absolutely incredible afternoon. It's a sad one, but an incredible one nonetheless, and great to be out with Scott and Noel. So from both of them, myself, Wiem, Senzo, and Fergus, we hope that you all have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all tomorrow afternoon on the Sunset Safari.